Hello everybody, my name is Galactic Gaming and this next to me is Edward Jellicoe and welcome to my secondary shield build on the Fleet Titan Science Destroyer. Help, I'm being consumed. Anyway, if you decided to click off because of that horrible pun, I will not blame you. But anyway, secondary shields. They're a weird thing in Star Trek Online because, I mean, not a lot of people even know about them and not a lot of people even go for them because they do have a few glaring weaknesses of their own. Um, I like secondary shields though. They're funny. They're a little bit weird, and I like weird. And just decided to make a build for them. So anyway, here it is. Is it stupid loadout bug? Anyway, I'll put this build on the Fleet Titan Science Destroyer because first of all, it has a 4-3 weapons layout, which is better than the 3-3 weapons layout that I would have put on the Fleet Oberth. And also because the Titan Science Destroyer has a really high shield modifier of 1.52. At least I'm pretty sure it is 1.52. If it's not, then I'll just put it up in post editing. But shields, secondary shields often don't scale off your shield capacity, but there are some things that can cause secondary shields that do scale shield capacity. So generally, the higher your shield capacity, the better your secondary shields are going to be. Anyway, I've said secondary shields long enough already. Let's get into the build. And my forward weapons are a bunch of diffusive Tetrion dual beam banks, which have been re-engineered to crit D damage modifiers. And these are on here because, well, I'll get into why I'm using Tetrion weapons later on. But out of all the Tetrion weapons, these are probably the most beneficial to my damage because they have a proc that applies shield diffusion, which gives me plus 10 shield resistance, and the enemy has minus 10 shield resistance. Now, one of the glaring weaknesses about secondary shields and temporary hull and secondary shields in general, they don't have any resistances of their own. They so you know how torpedoes generally don't deal much damage against shields? That's because shields have a generally really high resistance against torpedoes. Secondary shields and temporary hull don't have those effects. They take equal damage from torpedoes and energy weapons. So if you're facing against a really torpedo heavy enemy like say the Borg, secondary shields are going to be really helpful. And even more applying to the Borg, they can drain your secondary shields as well as your normal shields at the same time. So unless you have a really high shield regen, I would not recommend making this build if you're going to be fighting a lot of cyborgs. In my third weapon, I've got the Advanced Diffuser Tetrion Dual Beam Bank, which comes from the Low Buy store, and I'm running this with the Advanced Diffuser Tetrion Torpedo Launcher, which as well as doing extra Tetrion damage, and has the Tetrion Shield Diffusion proc. This also has a set bonus within itself, which gives me even more projectile damage and more shield resistance. I was considering going for the 3-piece, but honestly, I need to see about some of my low buy, so if you really want to go for the 3-piece and get the console as well, it's extra 25% Tetrion damage. For the core gear, this looks a little bit different. In my deflector, I'm using the preeminent deflector array, which comes from a mission that I'm pretty sure is in the New Frontiers arc. I'm pretty sure it's Skylar and Charybdis.
Starfleet intelligence believes a Zenkethi
No, it's
attack
not
on
that.
an
I'll put whatever mission it comes up in the post editing. But the reason why I'm using this deflector specifically is because it has the highest shield capacity of any deflector in the game, with a whopping 63.8 Starship shield capacity skill. And next up, I've got a strategic resonating secondary deflector array, which can be obtained in the Fleet Research Lab. That's the Krenim one. And why you want to use a strategic resonating secondary deflector is because resonating deflectors offer you extra shield resistance, and strategic secondary deflectors in general give you extra energy weapon damage, and that's usually pretty useful for two-side builds. For my impulse engines, it's the same, usually prevailing innovated impulse engines for the extra speed buff whenever I activate a weapon firing ability. Now for the warp core on the shield, this is a bit different. I'm using the Tholian Harmonic set, so I'm using the Tholian Nucleating Warp Core and the Tholian Enhanced ESC Shield. The reason why I'm using the Warp Core and the Shield is because this entire set basically revolves around these little Tholian Warp Crystals that you can get every now and again. And apart from dealing an impressive amount of damage to enemies, if you happen to fly into those warp crystals, those give you secondary shields. The normal Tholian warp crystals, those give you about 3,948 secondary shielding for 20 seconds. But if the shield capacity on this shield gets below 25%, a stronger Tholian warp crystal will form around your shield that gives you 13,163 points of secondary shielding for 20 seconds. And in my aft weapons, I've got a Tetrion turret that's marked for the pen modifier, the omnidirectional Tetrion beam array for the extra Tetrion damage, and I'm also using the omnidirectional interlacing Tetrion beam array, which is the third piece out of this Tholian nucleating set, and the fourth piece down here is in the science console with the Tholian crystalline interlacer. I should probably get into the whole set into the Tholian crystals. Excuse me, I clicked you. For the two piece of the Tholian harmonic set, this gives 3.1% crit chance to Tetrion weapons and 9.1% crit severity to Tetrion weapons. The three piece Tetrion nucleation basically allows all of your Tetrion weapons to basically create Tholian warp crystals on a proc system. And the four piece just gives you an active clicky ability that allows you to activate any Tholian warp crystal just idling around, and it'll just fly at the nearest enemy and deal a whole bunch of damage to them. And this also improves the two-piece set, the three-piece bonus. It improves the chance for Tetrion weapons to give Tholian warp crystal 3%. On my experimental weapon slot, because the Titan Sun, no, because Fleet, I cannot speak. This is what happens when you don't get enough sleep. Anyway, on Science Destroyers, they have access to experimental weapons, but only whilst they are in tactical mode. So when I do sometimes go into tactical mode, if I want to get rid of some shield capacity and get some extra damage on the table, I'm going to have their subspace depth charge, which comes from the Eagle Pilot Raider, because, well, this is the only experimental weapon that does Tetrion damage. That's really the only reason why I'm using this over something else, like the Gold-type Psionic Resonator. This is the only experimental weapon that does Tetrion damage. My device slot, I'm using advanced shield resilience boosters, which honestly aren't really that big. This is more just for the theme of the build, which just gives extra shield regeneration and reduces damage to my shields by 10% for 20 seconds. Reactive armor catalyst for the quick heal, deuterium surplus because the ship is slow as molasses. I got the Type 14 shuttle support squadron here. I know you don't have to put this thing in your device slot for you to activate it. I just prefer it this way. And the Kobayashi Maru transponder because of the random buffs it'll give me, one of which is an extra 20% capacity to maximum shields. In my Universal consoles, first I've got the in my Universal Engineering consoles, I've got 4 Tetrion Isomags, which gives me extra Tetrion damage and stacking max weapon power and regular weapon power. In my Science consoles, first I've got the Subspace Spectra Tunneling Field, which comes from the Voven, which is the summer event ship. If you've got enough low buy and you didn't manage to get it, then you can still buy it out. And what this does is it gives me a whole bunch of temporary hit points whenever I teleport to an enemy, and also reduces the recharge time of my Universal consoles by 25%. And this thing has a 30-second recharge time, so you're going to be able to use this quite a lot. Next I have the Shield Absorptive Frequency Generator, which you can get from the Tier 3 Valdor. When I'm below 90% on any shield facing, this basically gives a proc to my weapons that can restore my shields for 200% of my outgoing damage. This console has been pretty much what's managed to make shields not meta, but it's not irrelevant anymore. Next, I got the Fleet Power Network Array. This is pretty obvious. This is an energy weapon build, so I should probably buff it up as much as I can. And this is the single biggest haste giving console in the game. Next I've got the automated heavy Tetrion emitters, which comes from the Terra Monitor. And apart from having a nice 28.5% Tetrion damage passive, whenever I activate this console, this basically fires off 2 random beams that can refract to nearby enemies and apply a shield drain and a steady amount of Tetrion damage to them. This console is basically the Tetrion version of experimental power redirection without fires off. Next I've got the Thorian Crystalline Interlacer, which I went over earlier. It has a nice Tetrion damage buff. And whenever I activate the clicky on it, it applies the Tholian Web to a target, because with every single Tholian console in this game, there is no damn There's no damn uniqueness. It is always Tholian webs. And this just basically deals a bunch of physical damage as a damage over time, and holds targets for 9.8 seconds. In my tactical consoles, I've got three Protomatter Matrix Infusers for the Tetrion damage buff, which will buff my Tetrion damage, and my projectile weapons damage buff, which both of those buffs apply at the same time to the advanced diffusive Tetrion torpedo launcher, which is neat. But the main reason why I have these on the build here is because whenever I activate a weapon firing mode, there is a chance that I can get extra hull healing and shield regeneration. And the amount of shield regeneration and hull healing that these provide is not insignificant. And in my fourth tactical console, I've got the DPRM just as a panic button and for the bonus damage buff. For my captain specializations, this is also a bit different. First, I'm running Miracle Worker Primary, and this is mainly because I want to be able to get as much hull regeneration as I can on this build, because I'm going to be drawing quite a bit of threat with this build, so any bit of hull regeneration can also help. And for my secondary, I'm running Strategist because of the, well, firstly for diversionary tactics, when I have Threatening Stance active, this basically turns into a taunt and regenerates my hull for the amount of enemies that fell for that taunt. But also because of its passive 10% maximum shield capacity. So I'm trying to record a video. Can you stop consuming my ship, please? I want to use it later. Anyway, in my personal space traits, first I've got a good day to die, which allows me to go down fighting whenever I want. Shield Technician, which gives you an extra maximum shield capacity. Operative, which gives you extra crit chance and crit severity. Unconventional Systems, which recharges my universal consoles whenever I activate a control bridge officer ability. Adaptive Offense, which gives me crit chance but then turns into crit severity whenever I get a critical hit. Turn Targeting Systems for the extra crit severity. Fleet Coordinator, which gives you bonus all damage per team member. Superior Beam Trainer, which gives you bonus beam weapon damage. Inspirational Leader, which gives me increased skills for using grid officer abilities. And one of the skills that it can give me is 10% to maximum shield capacity. A 10% to the shield capacity skill. I should probably specify those two are very different things. Rogue Scientist aboard. I'm pretty sure I used this in one of my other videos because of its ability to trigger emergency power shields, which will trigger any ability tied to that, but without the cooldowns associated with said abilities. So whenever this bridge officer ability, whenever this personal space trait activates, I'll be able to get two of my secondary shield procs without having to get necessary cooldowns attached to them. And finally, got context. This begins with stacking damage resistance rating or bonus down or damage depending on whether I got hit or not. For my starship traits, first I've got Thunder Run, which gives me bonus damage to fire at will, and increased defense rating, which gives my speed. And if I'm in threatening stance, which I am going to be, this gives me an extra 150% threat generation. Next, got Entwined Tactical Matrices, which is literally the only, well, second only way to extend your British ability fire at will. If I was smart, I might be able to use Redirecting Rays, but I'm not made out of money, and this build is already crazy expensive enough. Next, I've got Layered Shielding, which comes from the Romulan version of the Atlas prototype Dreadnought. And Emergency Power to Shields and Extend Shield grant 6,000 secondary shields for 30 seconds. Next, I've got Emergency Response Teams, which comes off the Vulcan to Power Scout Vessel, which is a low-buy store ship or an old event ship. And basically, whenever a shield phase becomes depleted, this gives me a crap ton of secondary shields. Like, this gives me 42,000 secondary shielding. And while the secondary shields persist, whenever I activate a science or intel bridge officer ability, on this ship it's only going to be the science bridge officer ability, it gives me extra whole hit points and extra shield regeneration applied once to each facing. Next, I've got Temporal Tunneling for the extra firing cycle haste. This will really be triggering off of Gravity Well and Tractor Beam Catapult. Next, I've got Weapon Hot Deflectors to 4, which comes from the Inquiry. Whenever I activate Emergency Power to Shields, this gives me extra secondary shields and firing cycle haste for energy weapons for 30 seconds. This and Layered Shielding are the two abilities that are getting triggered with Rogue Scientist support, and that literally just happened right here. See, Weapons Hot Deflectors full and Layered Shielding, but there is no cooldown associated, so when I activate Emergency Power to Shields, I basically refresh the duration of it. And finally, I've got Improved Photonic Officer for the cooldowns and for the bonus shield healing and exotic damage. My space reputation is a bit different. First, I've got Precision for the extra crit chance. I've got Tireless Duality for the extra crit chance. And Advanced Targeting Systems for the extra crit severity. One of my last 2 slots, I got Superior Shield Repair, which gives me a 1000 shield regeneration on top of my normal shield regeneration every 6 seconds, and Enhanced Shield Systems, which gives me extra shield capacity. And my active space reputation is also the same, so that will be Enter Time Entanglement Singularity, buy my Molecular Shield Generator, deploy Sensor Inference Platform, Refracting Tetron Cascade, which this will trigger the Thorium Nucleating Set, and Force Challenge to drag enemies scurrying back towards my weapons. In my Commander Tactical seat, which will only be active, well, the Commander level bit will only be active if I'm actually activating Tactical mode. I've also got Tractor Beam Catapult 1, which is to trigger Temporal Tunneling, Torpedo Spread 2, and Fire at Will 3 to keep Fire at Will up nearly 100% of the time, and Attack Pen and Beam 3 for the extra debuff. In my Ensign Tactical seat, I've got Tactical Team 1, and I'll go over why I'm using that when I go over to the Duty Officers. In my Lieutenant Engineering seat, I've got Emergency Powered Shields 1, which is pretty obvious. This is a shield build, so you probably want that ability. And Emergency Powered Engines 2 to make this build somewhat fast, because this thing is absolutely slow. In my Commander Science seat, I've got Jam Sensors and Scramble Sensors for the Uncon triggers, Photonic Officer 2 for the Bridge Officer cooldown reduction, and Gravity Well 3 just to be another Uncon trigger to trigger Temporal Tunneling and to group up all of my enemies so they cannot escape my weapons. In my Lieutenant Commander Science / Command seat, I've also got Training 1 to trigger Temporal Tunneling and unconventional systems. I've got Rally Point Marker for the extra shield heal, and it's just basically a really decent Command Burst Officer ability. And Call Emergency Artillery 1, because summoning Defiant class ships will never not be satisfying. In my Duty Officers, first I've got 29 of 47. Whenever I activate a Science ability, this has a chance to set my power levels to maximum for 5 seconds. And this is mainly being used that way I can trigger Fleet Power Network Array at its maximum power. I've got, I removed you. Why are you doing back on this build? Okay, there we go. I've got 2 Energy Weapons Officers, so give me extra crit severity whenever I fire energy weapons. I've got the Emergency Con Hologram to reduce the recharge of evasive maneuvers whenever I activate Emergency Powered Engines. And I've also got Beckett Mariner. Whenever I activate Tactical and Team, there is a 20% chance to activate a whole bunch of secondary shielding for 1 second, and then again for another second, and then again for 5 seconds. If you know the meme, you'll understand why those timings are there. And finally, I've got 15 to 47, which is basically the only Feedback Pulse Borg Duty Officer I have. And the reason why I've got this thing is because Feedback Pulse usually generates quite a bit of threat. And I want to be able to drag some threat away from my teammates back into myself so I can demonstrate how well this build does. So, now that I've shown you what this build looks like, let me take you for a run of IC and I'll show you the pass. Stay tuned!
Scanning the nanite transformer. Got it. Additional ignite available.
admittedly, this run wasn't the smoothest, mainly because me and the other person who were running threatening stance both died, and there was that one person in here who did not nearly enough damage to really be doing elite content well. As a rule of thumb, unless you're doing over 100k DPS in ISE, you probably should not be doing elite content. But even through all of that, having 226k on a pseudo tank build is not bad. If we go into our analysis, you'll see that the most amount of damage came from my Tholium Warp Crystals, which is funny, but also not surprising, because, I mean, this build kind of craps them out all over the place. Next up, I had Artillery Blast, that comes from Call Emergency Artillery. I keep getting them confused with Concentrate Firepower. Next, I got the Automated Heavy Tetron Emitters, and that's the console that I was talking about on the monitor. That thing just does a fair amount of damage for a Tetron build. Underneath that, we've got the Abusive Tetron Dual Beam Banks under a Fire at Wheel 3 and Fire at Wheel 1. Didn't do nearly as much damage as I thought it would be doing, but then again, this is not a really damage-focused build. Underneath that, there's a Tetron Beam Ray, that'll be the Tetron Omni. Then the Tholium Warp Crystal Detonate. I have no idea why that shows up twice on the build. And then we've got a Tetron Beam Ray on Fire at Wheel 3. If you use a Tetron Torpedo and Spread 2 did 9k, which is honestly not that surprising. And then we go into our healing output. We see that most of my healing came from the heavy Tetron emitters. This build is just really powerful for that. And then underneath that, we've got the Shield Absorptive Frequency Generator. That's the Valdor console. And then underneath that, the Biomolecular Shield Generator. And everything else is just either too insignificant to really point out. Although, funnily enough, for some reason, I somehow managed to get healed by the Type 14 Shuttlecraft, which is kind of funny. So, that was my secondary shield build on the Fleet Titan Science Destroyer. I hope you guys enjoyed what happens when you decide to throw all logic out the window and go into a defensive type that oddly does not make sense. Remember to like and subscribe to my video, comment down below what you think. Join my Discord if you want. It's also really fun down there. Also join the Continuum Discord if you want to meet other content creators like myself. Anyway, my name is Galactic Gaming. This person behind me is Edward Jellicoe. And until next time, we'll see you later. Have a great time. Bye bye.